Welcome to the show. It is Sandy and Shawn. The Santa Claus, the GOAT, will be with us in just a little bit. But of course, as we start every program here out at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit, I'm going to get it by the end of this, Cody. Cody Roark, the
it's going to be hard to miss it.
Right. Fortunately, at least there's two signs right in front of my face the whole time, so maybe I'll get that memorized eventually. But here we are out in the second week of Broncos camp. Of course, focus on the quarterbacks as expected. Go away from calling this a competition. In the end, this is about when, not if, Bo Nix takes over the QB1 spot. And now it feels already as if Zach Wilson has kind of fallen out. You and I talked about this before. Zach Wilson was never really in the mix to start. He was always a bit of a flyer. The idea is for the Broncos to find out if he is a long-term backup option for them. And so you can kind of take him out of this. It now becomes about when Bo Nix will start. Would it be a better choice for Jarrett Stidham to start a game or two before putting Nix in or not? We've only been a couple practices in. So anyone who's looking at it saying, Bo Nix didn't look quite as good as Jarrett Stidham yesterday. Okay, in the second padded practice. Take a deep breath and relax. It's not as if Stidham was out here looking like Joe Montana is prime either.
And both of those guys yesterday had passes batted down. I mean, there were 5 passes batted down. Jarrett Stidham had 2 passes batted down at the line of scrimmage by the defensive line. Bo Nix had 1. The thing, though, is like, these two guys are really in a competition for the job, but ultimately all roads are going to lead to Bo because he was drafted in the first round. But I will say this, like, in terms of the offense, the thing that frustrates me about the media and even just like the fans sometimes is, you watch a practice and all of a sudden it's like, okay, this guy didn't look good, and it's the end of the world. It's like, oh my gosh, like, no, like, you got to understand there's a process that has to play out with these guys in particular. We're watching them here, going through the walkthrough as they do every single morning. But the thing is these guys are going through the install period on the offensive side of the ball right now.
And not just the quarterbacks in that regard, too.
No,
everybody.
It's the defense as well, though it's a little easier for the defense because you have your call. But then each position has different rules per call that you have defensively based on what the formation is offensively. But, ultimately the offense is trying to just get comfortable with their foundation. Like, everyone's investing. Like, it gets exhausting reading like the scorecard every day because the scorecard, it's only a content conversation. To the coaching staff, that doesn't matter. It's the body of work here. And I think the practices next week will more than likely be more definitive about, okay, hey, we're in game week. We play the Indianapolis Colts next Sunday. So now that means we need to start implementing our base stuff. We need to be ahead further than we were last week. And so you're going to see that. And I think it's going to take through the first preseason game, joint practices, second preseason game. And then I think you're going to see Shawn announce the starter before they play Seattle. That week off that they have in between, like roster cuts, the final preseason game, that's when it'll probably come forth.
Right. And you'll see things change in the snap count and practices. But you're right. When you take a practice, what you're really doing is you're taking a little snapshot. And remember, teams don't stop practicing once the season starts. You know, every single sport, basketball, hockey, baseball, there's still practices. And human beings sometimes have good days and they have bad days. And that's why you don't evaluate it in those small little sample sizes. You look at the larger sample size. And one practice isn't necessarily enough to sort that all out. And I think when you look at, but let's look at the wider view, right? And getting it eventually to Bo Nix. If the idea of this season is to find out that Bo Nix is your starter going forward, which I presume it is.
He is. And that's how the team feels.
Right. Well, and that's how the team has to feel. That's how they have to feel. And so if the team feels he is their guy going forward, what's the point of starting Jarrett Stidham in week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, no, I mean,
why? What do you get out of it? If you believe Bo Nix, if the team believes Bo Nix is the guy, and they've already seen enough to say, yeah, we feel good that for the next couple of years at least that this is our guy, then what's the point of grabbing a player who, by the way, I know we say veteran, he has 4 career starts to Nix's 0 career starts. It's not a massive difference. I just don't really see even the point behind saying that, well, Stidham will start in Seattle because it's, loud in Seattle? Well, doesn't Nix have to learn how to deal with that
Bo's
too?
Played in Seattle against the Huskies, and it's loud there.
Right.
Bo's got the experience. That's, I know the elements and loudness, they're definitely a factor. That's not something that Bo's ever really been concerned about. Bo's played in the SEC. He's played under the bright lights at some of the biggest games against some of the biggest teams when he was at Auburn. And then also what he did at the University of Oregon. You go and you play in hostile territory. Like, Bo, if I'm not mistaken, last year, I believe he had 16 touchdowns, 0 interceptions on the road. So he's not necessarily a guy who's fazed by hostile environments. I think he's a guy who's comfortable with his process, his technique, and obviously the chemistry with his teammates, specifically at the college level. Mike McGlinchey told us the other day, Bo's very mature and he feels like he's going to, do a lot of great things for the locker room and for the team this upcoming season. So it's just going to play out. The dog days of training camp, it's long, it's grueling. You're not going to look perfect all the time. You're not going to look great. And look, there's people out here who are counting, stats like, 7 of 9, this and that, how many picks are being thrown.
Right.
None of that stuff
But the
matters.
coaches aren't even really, they're tracking it, but only
that
for the
stuff
larger, wider stuff.
No.
And honestly, it's going to come down to the coaching staff who decides basically what they've seen and what they feel based on how it looks. Because obviously you say, oh, well, he's only thrown this many and they were complete. That might be a good thing. Maybe it means that one of your corners made a great play and now it counts as a quote unquote incomplete.
I mean,
but
in Buffalo,
doesn't mean it's a bad throw.
First day of pads in Buffalo, I believe Josh Allen had 3 interceptions on his first 4 passing attempts. So it's like, we know what Josh Allen can do. We know what Josh Allen's very good. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the league. It's like, the one thing I don't think fans realize when we're out here at practice, and even when the regular season comes, quarterbacks will throw interceptions in practice too. But you know what? We don't report on it because it doesn't matter.
Right.
None of that stuff is meaningless. As a matter of fact, I'd argue you want to get the mistakes out here in practice. That way you're like, all right, hey, this is maybe how the defense will play me if I'm going through this read or on this specific play. If this guy intercepted it, what did I do wrong? How can I maybe counteract it? Is there something I'm giving away, on the tape that maybe people can pick up on? That's the intricacies of practice. And it gets so overlooked because, unfortunately, we're in an era, social media, everything, it's got to be reactionary. It's got to be instant gratification. But these guys are all competing. They're working their tails off. And internally, the Broncos, the coaching staff, I can tell you this, they feel comfortable. They feel confident about the direction that they're heading right now. Practices have gone well. Camp has gone well. And it's just the process, let it play out. And I think that's exactly what this coaching staff's doing. But I think you're going to see more urgency next week as they do get into game prep.
Yeah, the idea, of course, that the announcement of a starter is sort of the next big thing. That's not necessarily the case, of course. We'll start to see it happen before there ends up being an announcement, obviously, out here on the practice field. And I kind of want to help people understand to move away. I get it. Quarterbacks are fun, new shiny object. Everyone gets excited about what might be next. I do understand it. But as we talked about before, this is not a competition. It is purely a matter of time until Bo Nix is the starting quarterback. Bo Nix was identified prior to the draft by Shawn Payton.
I would say it's
the
a
Broncos.
competition until he's named the starter.
Yes, of course. And it would be at any position.
Yeah.
But it's a foregone conclusion that Bo Nix will be named the starter. It's just a matter of when. And basically, I guess let's look at it coming into today. Is there any reason that you look at Bo Nix today and say he's so far behind Jarrett Stidham that between now and the time the regular season starts, he can't make up the gap?
No, not at all. And look, I don't even think there's really a gap between them.
Don't either.
That's the thing that people are trying to say.
Yesterday
like,
there was right.
Like,
so
where's the gap?
Practice.
What's the gap?
The idea coming out of yesterday's practice was, well, Jarrett Stidham was so much more comfortable all across, local national
just
media.
Just because he had a completion to little Jordan Humphrey on a dig route for 15 yards, the competition's over. Like that.
Yeah. To me, Nix is so far behind. The comfort level's not there. Let's not get crazy here about Jarrett Stidham. And I'm not trying to run him down, but you're talking about a guy that's been on 3 teams in 4 years, has made 4 career starts. 2 of them were at the tail end of last year, and probably wouldn't have made those except Russell Wilson was persona non grata to Shawn Payton by the end of the season. So you're not talking about a guy that's remarkably established, and it's not. It's remarkable to me at how much and how oftentimes this happens. But it's been a while since there's been a first-round draft pick. And there's been a while since there's a first-round draft pick that people knew of. When Paxton Lynch was drafted, all the way back when, people didn't watch a lot of Memphis football games, so they had no judgment. There was no way to avoid Oregon. They were leveling the University of Colorado. They were into the semifinals of the national championship. You couldn't avoid watching Oregon. And so people know who Bo Nix is. Now having him in here, obviously they're excited about it. But then the notion that Jarrett Stidham, because he's somewhat familiar, ends up being either a stopgap starter or something else different. It really is fascinating to me. And that's the seesaw. And I'm glad you see it the same way, because it isn't after every practice that you have to reset the landscape of this team, because that's simply inaccurate. That's a stylistic thing for people who are looking for content and looking for clicks, or looking for whatever, to say, oh, all these really important things happen in practice. Okay, That can be true. There can be really important things happening in practice. But every morning to say, but that changes everything, that almost never happens. And it hasn't happened out here once yet.
Yeah, and no, and
With
look,
one exception. Perhaps when Levi Wallace made a statement with his pick, Wallace, when we're talking about guys that are significantly ahead of their other competitors at this position, maybe Wallace made a play. That was important, and it maybe changed the calculus. But very little things have happened out here with only 2 padded practices that change everything for the Denver Broncos. This is part of a normal, regular process. And this second year under Sean Payton, it's much more streamlined.
Yeah, well, and the thing too is, the thing that is in Jarrett's favor is that, he has been in this system for over a year now. This is his second year. Of course, there's going to be more comfortability and familiarity with it. He understands what Shawn wants, and from an operational standpoint, he also looked good. And Jarrett looked good, I felt like, in the second and third preseason games last year, because last year when he first came in, first game didn't look so sharp. Second game against San Francisco, he's kind of dishing and diming a little bit. But the thing is, of course, Jarrett's going to be a little bit ahead in terms of understanding the system. Does that mean he's ahead in the competition? No, not necessarily. You look at what Bo has been able to do in terms of his athleticism. Like, if there's times where, like, for example, I'd say yesterday's a great example. Okay, there were opportunities where the passing lane wasn't necessarily there for him. He used his legs. He demonstrated his mobility, and he's fast. Like, he's deceptively fast. I mean, but then again, you go back and you follow him at Oregon. His first season at Oregon, ran for over 500-something yards, had 14 rushing touchdowns.
He still had 234 and 6 last year.
So it's like, the idea that he's okay, he's a guy who can win off structure, but also you want him to stay in the pocket. I think he's done a really good job of that. But, as you mentioned, it's only 2 days of pads so far registered. They're on the 3rd day of pads here today. It's just going to have to continue to play out. You just need more reps. That's the thing. Reps. And I'm not coming out of every practice saying, okay, well, hey, this guy's ahead, this guy's not. I think it's firmly right now Nix and Stidham, 1A, 1B, no particular order. It's really between these 2 guys. And regardless, Jarrett Stidham's going to be on this roster no matter what, because even if he's the backup, he's a veteran guy who's been in some good locker rooms. He understands the game. He can help Bo with certain things and vice versa. Bo can learn a little bit from him, even if he doesn't start. But as we've said before, even if Stidham starts, there's going to be this acclimation process where the fan base, like the moment the offense struggles, the first time they go 3 and out 2 times in a row, they're going to be calling for Bo to come out there and play. So,
and I'm not convinced that's doing Stidham any favors at all.
No, not at all.
Again, a guy with 4 career NFL starts.
Yeah, so I still think Bo's going to be named the week 1 starter.
I do too.
It's just like
I've felt that way since prior to the draft.
The hard part about our job is just like you hear it every day. Everyone, like different media outlets, different people with opinions are just like, oh, well, this guy should be the starter. This guy. I'm like, no, let it just play out. Like, I put a tweet out on Twitter today talking about what the coaching staff is exactly looking for. And so it's going to be fun. Like, just let it play out. Broncos country. Practice isn't going to define how this team's going to do in the regular season. They have to get there. There's a lot of ground that they got to make up in order to do so.
And keep in mind when you're talking about the quarterbacks, and this would be the thing to keep in mind whether you're out here at camp or whether you're following from afar. The coaching staff knows where each person started from. And as Cody made it very clear, Jarrett Stidham starts out ahead. So the truth of the matter is, if the gap has closed from where it started, then Bo Nix in many ways is actually already ahead, because the coaching staff knows Stidham has an edge. He was here last year. He's worked with Sean Payton. Nix has not. So Nix doesn't have to necessarily overtake Stidham, because as long as the gap closed, you could basically, if you think of it as a race with the Olympics going on right now, if you start a lap down, but you finished half a lap down, guess which one was actually faster? Yeah. The person who was in theory in quote unquote second. And that's the way coaches look at it too. He is Cody Roark. Make sure you check out everything he's putting together at Mile High Sports. The Locked On Broncos podcast. He's easy to find, and he's out here every single day. So check out everything Cody does for the latest with the Broncos. We will be back with Sandy Clough from Broncos training camp at Dove Valley next on Mile High Sports.